This is Katie with Empowering Astrology, and I just want to thank you all for your patience. I'm going to turn on the camera so maybe you guys can see me. There's a 30-second delay on this broadcast, and so I just wanted to say if you guys have any questions, that we have to kind of work around the real time difference. So I'm just going to start. I'm sorry that we're getting a little bit of a late start, just by a few minutes, but the hosting software for the webinar, they changed their format a little bit. So I had a little bit of a last minute having to run around. So let me just begin. I'm going to share my screen, and if you can hear me, there's a chat section and there's a Q&A section that should be part of what you're seeing on your end. So if you can hear me, that's great. Okay, fantastic. Sounds like people can hear me, so I'm not just speaking into the void. But today we're going to talk about the natal chart, and I am obviously very passionate about astrology, and I love it when we can get people to step beyond just the sun signs. And there's nothing wrong with the sun signs, but it's like the difference between chopsticks, on the piano, and being able to do a little bit more than that. And for me, the natal chart is the snapshot of your soul. So why wouldn't you want to get to know yourself more, make yourself more empowered, and just to make choices, hopefully, that help expand your consciousness through your natal chart. Because one of the things that I've been discovering, and this is just through my own journey, because of course I have a natal chart like all of you, is that when you start to engage the planets in your natal chart from a space of higher consciousness, you start to open up the experience with those planets. And this is maybe a little bit off topic, but I just wanted to plant those seeds because I'm under the assumption that you're coming to me because you are interested in astrology and you do want to learn how to read either natal charts or your own natal chart. And that's what we all do. We start with our own natal chart. So when you're beginning this journey, and as you start to delve into your own chart, you're going to start to discover things. And that thought that's probably going to go in your head that's going to say, wait a second, like, is this bad? And I get that all the time when I start teaching people astrology. They start to learn a little too much, and the first thing they go to is like, oh, I got this in my chart, it's bad. Like, no, like, I just want to kind of get you guys not thinking in that kind of good bad duality before when you start getting into the chart, because it's really about opening up the potential for everything in the natal chart, whether it's a talent or a challenge. So let's and I know that we already have a couple of questions, but I'll definitely get to them. And I do recommend, if anything is not clear as we're talking, or rather I'm talking, please feel free to ask as many questions as we can kind of get in our time together. So let me share my screen. Maybe I'll give you guys a wave as well. There we go. So just wanted to say hey before I start the PowerPoint presentation. So let's go. And if you're not seeing the PowerPoint correctly, let me know, because that would be bad. So our class today is reading the natal chart, the basics, and some of you, you might be listening to this on a recording versus live. And if you are listening to a recording, I recommend having your own natal chart nearby. You can easily get that for free on the internet just by Googling free natal chart. Astro.com is a good resource. You will need your exact birth time, and I'll explain a little bit why that is as we move along. But it will help you get a little bit of grounding. Maybe if you have your own chart to follow along. And if you don't, that's fine. Maybe some of you who are listening already know what your own chart looks like. And okay, looks like the PowerPoint is working good. Perfect. I have shared the screen. Some people, if you aren't still seeing it, let me know. But it looks like we're doing good. So let's begin. So just a little bit about myself quickly for those who are not listening to live, or who have not come to me, let's say via Facebook or Twitter, because I do a lot of things on social media. But my name is Katie Sweetman, and I'm with Empowering Astrology, and that's empoweringastrology.com. And my whole take on astrology is about self-development and personal empowerment. And I do what I do because I don't want people to be in fear, and hopefully to make more conscious and expansive choices about their life using the natal chart as a tool. I've been doing astrology pretty much all my life, at least since I was a teenager, but it's really within the last, I guess, 6 or 7 years at this point that I've been doing it like real deal astrology, as opposed to my party trick, which is what it used to be when I was younger. So enough about me. Let's talk about goals for the class. So here's the thing. You could probably spend the rest of your life learning how to read a chart. That's not to say that you'll never read a chart. Like, you're always discovering different nuances and different techniques. It's astrology is a language. So, just like if you're English speaking, your understanding of language and your understanding the nuances of language is going to be very different as you get older, as opposed to, let's say, when you're starting to learn your ABCs. And if astrology is a language, we've already known let's say our ABCs, hopefully for this class. This is geared towards the intermediate, but I will give a little bit of foundation. And that you start to be able to put some of the stuff together. This is really about orienting you in the natal chart. So maybe it doesn't look so mystical or arcane, and that you can start to, like I said, put things together. So I'm just going to check back and maybe see if there's any questions. Just looking at some of the questions, Kara talks about the Time Passages app for iPhone. That's fantastic, because you can use the app on your phone. SolarFire, I think, has an app for the iPhone. If you don't have an iPhone or you don't have a smart device, astro.com is a good resource. And there's other software out there that you can use to calculate the natal chart. Time Passages, you can also have it on your computer, not just the smartphone. Yeah, so definitely keep questions coming. And I know I see, Sandy, that you asked about orbs, and we will definitely talk about orbs. That's definitely on the PowerPoint. So let's go back to the presentation. So what is the natal chart? Sometimes you'll hear this referred to as the birth chart as well. So the natal chart is a snapshot of the sky at the moment that you're born, both above the horizon and below the horizon. You'll understand a little bit more what that means as we go along this idea of horizon. But it is supposed to be a full view. So if you're born at noon, the sun's above the horizon. But the other planets haven't gone away, even though we can't see them. They are somewhere. They're below the horizon. So the natal chart takes that into account. And then, the natal chart can be used to look at personality, temperament, gifts, talents, challenges. For the type of astrology that I do, I'm looking at karma. And karma just simply means that we all have these areas that just seem to be a little stickier than usual. And I like to look at, what's the soul's journey? How is that revealed through the natal chart? And what's kind of the deeper material, when you kind of scratch beyond the personality level of things in the chart? And what are people's dharma? What's their potentiality in this lifetime? And I'm also really geared towards the idea of the natal chart as a clock. For me, the chart serves two functions. It's both a map, so like the map of the personality, a map of the soul, but it's also this clock. And this is where predictive astrology comes in, which we're not going to talk about today. We'll talk about in subsequent classes and videos. But when you do know how to read the chart and you do know how to, let's say, transits, progressions and solar arcs, you can see how the natal chart is this amazing timepiece, this quantum timepiece that tells you what time it is in your life. And it's a clock like you'll never, there is no parallel, because it's just all these different layers and different dimensions with this clock. It's not like, looking at a regular clock, but there's certainly parallels. And so I try to tell people that the natal chart's a clock so they can kind of start to interface with it that way. And certainly when you look at the natal chart, there are similarities in how the information is presented. And I'm a little bit of a nerd. And so when I look at the natal chart's a schematic to me. It tells me how the energy is programmed. Astrology is so much about hierarchy and, what are the hubs of energy and like who's kind of calling the shots in the natal chart. So that's another kind of facet that we're discussing today. So just going to check in, see if there's any questions. Doesn't look like it so far. So let's talk about the elements of the natal chart. And this is really the nitty-gritty of things, because it's like, okay, what are the things that go into making a natal chart and how do we identify their function? So by and large, the major component of the natal chart is the wheel. It creates the container, it creates the vessel, and the image that I've created here is a blank wheel. So the circle, this idea of, everything is happening within the circle in astrology, and a circle is 360 degrees. And there's this thing, I guess we'll call houses. Maybe that's in the next slide. But yeah, so the wheel is divided into 12 sections. Those sections are called houses. Each house means a different aspect of life, an area of life. And in the last point, I say it looks like a clock. Maybe that's not as evident at first, but just like there's different hours on a clock, there's like the 12 o'clock, there's 6 o'clock, 3 o'clock. And just like there's a time to wake up and go to bed or have dinner or go to work, there's kind of like these similar metaphorical time in people's life. So the signs, that's another element of the natal chart. And I'm kind of going on the assumption that you guys are familiar or familiar-ish with the glyphs for the signs. So I'm not going to go through them so much. But this is showing you something called a natural chart. And so in a natural chart, Aries would be on the first, and it would be in something called zodiacal order. And that just means Aries, Taurus, Gemini, and so forth, all the way to the end to Pisces. And the signs obviously are our major component of the natal chart. And then there's the houses that we've been talking about, and there's 12 of them. The first house is always going to be where it's labeled number 1. Second house, third house, all the way to the 12th. And I remember that was a question that I got a lot when people started looking at the natal chart. They're like, where's the first house? And it's always going to be in that left-hand side, and it's always going to be labeled with a 1. It's going to be just below the horizon as well. Oops, getting ahead of myself. Just checking to see if there's any questions. So the other major component is something called the angles. And I'll just kind of interject here for a moment that some of this stuff is pretty abstract. If you've never really seen a chart, you're probably like, okay, like, I don't really know how to put this all together, but this is just laying a foundation. We will look at regular charts later in the presentation. But this is to kind of give you the idea of the elements. So the angles, there's 4 of them, and this is called the ascendant descendant. It's highlighted in red, is one of the 2 of the 4 angles. It represents the horizon. So it always bisects the wheel, like right across, and that never changes. So that's always going to give you a sense of orientation in the natal chart. The what's it called? The ASC, that's the acronym for ascendant. And then the DSC is descendant. You'll see that labeled on charts sometimes. Sometimes it won't be labeled, but I know in the astro.com charts, it's labeled ASC, DSC. And it's just a 2-dimensional representation of the horizon line. And I'll talk a little bit more about when we look at natal charts, because that might not compute yet. The ascendant is also known as the rising sign. So those are 2 interchangeable terms. The next thing is the midheaven and something called the emum coli. It's Latin for bottom of the sky. These are the other 2 of the 4 angles. And the midheaven, there's a Latin word for it called medium coli, and that's abbreviated into MC. IC, so the MC is the top of the chart, the IC is the bottom. And here's something to keep in mind, and this depends on the program that's drawn the chart. Sometimes that MC is not straight up and down. Sometimes it's a little turn. So when you're looking at a chart, you want to look for the label. Usually whoever's created the software that draws the chart, they make the 4 angles a bit thicker. They'll be labeled MC, IC, DSC, ASC. And the idea is that the midheaven is it's like high noon. So when when the sun gets to the highest point in the sky, that would be the midheaven. And really, the natal chart is a 2-dimensional representation of astronomy. The ecliptic, where is like kind of like the high noon, where's midnight, and it translates all this stuff into this chart. And there's a lot of math that goes into it that I do not know, but thankfully there's programs out there that draw the chart for us. Because here's the thing, and this is a true story, back before they had these programs out there, especially on the web, that would make these charts. It could take you almost an hour because you're looking up latitude and longitude, you're plugging data in, you're doing all these formulas to get you the information, then you're having to hand draw everything. So thank God for computers, because I don't know what I would do. Just want to check in, see if there's any. Oh, looks like my just looking at some of the questions. It says more on that. I wasn't quite sure what that was a question pertaining on. So, Sandy, if you could elaborate on your question about more than that, and I would be happy to do so. But in the meantime, we'll talk about the hemispheres. So when I was talking about the horizon line, this idea of the chart being drawn in half or cut in half, and the top of the chart is what's visible in the chart, meaning it was above the horizon when the person was born, and then the stuff below, which we go to the next slide. Oops. Wait, there we go. Is what was not visible when the person was born. And so this is actually important to note when you're getting to start to look at charts. People see, and when I say people, I mean the people outside of you, they see what's above the horizon. They don't necessarily see what's below the horizon. So if somebody's got a lot of their chart below the horizon, sometimes it's harder for people to see things. You kind of keep things closer to the vest. Generally, generally the things that are above the horizon are people. There's a sense of publicness. I don't even know if that's quite a word in English, but is it visibility? That's probably better English. There's a sense of visibility with things above the horizon. So if you have a chart where there's a lot of stuff above the horizon, people see that, especially planets that are clustered near the top of the chart. There's a sense of status with them. So I'll get more into that later. But there, I will say that there is an exception to what I just said about things above the chart. The 12th house and the 8th house, and those are labeled with the 12 and 8. Those are water houses, meaning that they are houses that align with, let's say, the signs of Pisces and Scorpio in the what's called the natural chart. This might be a little bit of a technical or advanced concept, but the water houses, they're more emotionally run, and things that are on the emotional side of things, you don't notice them, like they're internal. So when somebody have like all these planets above the horizon or even below the horizon, but if they've got a packed 12th house, that's stuff that people don't see. There's a sense of hiddenness with the 12th and the 8th. So I just wanted to put that out there, especially for those people who know a little bit more astrology. So kind of get back to my thing. So the other major component of the natal chart is the planets. And so when we're looking at the natal chart, we're taking the data of where the planets were when you were born and placing them in the chart. So astrology is all about this kind of unique signature and how your planets are going to be unique to you. Yes, there might have been somebody who was born the same day as you, but they're going to be, let's say, arranged around the chart in a different position. But they're still going to have, like, these are called aspects. We're going to get to that in a moment. But astrology is about establishing a relationship between things in the circle and deriving meaning. So depending on where your moon is, and maybe it has a relationship to Pluto, and this example right here is, it's kind of rudimentary, but Pluto and the moon are in the same sign. So those planets they're having some sort of dialogue. And what does that dialogue mean? If this was your own chart, what would that mean? So I want to move on. And the other major component of the natal chart is the planets, and these are the glyphs. So I'm assuming that you're fairly familiar with what these planets are, but just super quick and easy, go through them. So the sun, that is the identity. It's the self. It's the ego. It's how you express yourself. It is the light that gives life to your whole chart. Without the sun, there would be no you. I mean, that's why sun sign astrology works so well, because it's working with the ego. It's working kind of on that surface level of things. And it's the most important part of the natal chart, which is the sun. But there are other important parts. The other of which is the moon. The moon is your kind of your wants, your needs, your desires. It, you have to feed your moon. You have to take care of your moon. It's the emotional, intuitive side of you. Mercury is your communication planet. It's how you think. It's how you process information. It's how you talk. Do you talk fast? Do you talk slow? Are you quiet? That's what your Mercury would give us more information about. Venus is the planet of attraction. It's kind of like this. We all need Venus. Think of it like or in a group situation, maybe you're out with friends and there's an argument, and Venus is the peacemaker. Venus wants to find common ground. It wants to find consensus. And Venus is also about relationships, the sense of like, you can't do life solely as an individual, Sun. You need to learn how to dialogue with people, have, you might, either it's romantic partnership or even just, regular one-on-one relationships. So Venus, I mean, it sounds a little cheeseball, but Venus is your love planet in a way. It's going to tell, how do you do relationships? Turning to Mars, Mars is how you take action. It's your vigor. Some people kind of take some time to get going. Are they pokey? What's going on with the Mars? Are people angry all the time? Is Mars doing something in the chart that talks about temper, or maybe even like that, like a sharp tongue? Like maybe if Mars and Mercury were having a hard, let's say a difficult relation in the natal chart, that might manifest as somebody who's got a sharp tongue. Versus Venus and Mercury is somebody who knows how to say the right words to diffuse a situation and to kind of create the kind of conciliatory tone. Mars is your passion. It's also sexuality. Moving on to Jupiter, I should also say that the sun and moon are something called the luminaries. They give off and reflect life, or light, or life. I mean, I guess that's probably both of those things are the case. And the sun and moon are something called personal planets. And as are Mercury, Venus, and Mars, those are also personal planets. We get onto Jupiter and Uranus, and we're starting to get into outer planet territory. Outer planet means these are slower moving planets. They start to govern things that are beyond the ego. They're beyond the self. So, Jupiter has a lot to do. On one hand, it shows about growth. It shows what you believe in. It shows your faith. It shows how you grow. Jupiter is a planet of growth and expansion. But Jupiter we're starting to deal with things that are kind of more on like a society level of things. So Jupiter is law. So somebody who sometimes has a strong Jupiter, I've seen they're lawyers. There's also a sense of religion with Jupiter. So Jupiter might be the preacher, might be the priest. This is when you would kind of take in the entirety of the natal chart. And then the planet Uranus. So when we, I totally left out Saturn. Oh, no, I did it. Saturn is out of order. But anyway, we'll skip to Saturn because Saturn would naturally fall after Jupiter. Saturn is also one of those planets that starts to deal with things that are more on a society level. Saturn is government. Saturn is structure, commitment, responsibility, maturity. You need all these planets in some degree. Saturn, has a little bit of a bad rap in astrology, but I like Saturn. Like Saturn makes sure you pay your bills. Saturn makes sure you show up to work and, have a vision for your life and work hard to get there. So what's so bad about that? But he has a little bit of a reputation as what's called a malefic in astrology. And I'm not saying that Saturn, sometimes, a Saturn transit can't, transit might be something that you're not familiar with, but, let's say the Saturn return. People have something called the Saturn return at age 29 and age 58. And it's a rite of passage that we all go through. And that just simply means that around those ages, Saturn is I call him the man with the clipboard. We have that appointment and he's checking off our life and making sure that we've done what we're supposed to do, that we have our act together, that we're showing up in life. And if we've been slacking off, I think that's when we get, let's say, the quote unquote negative side of Saturn. I also see Saturn really active when people have their first child, when they get married. So Saturn's not, such a bad guy. I'm just going to quick make sure there's any. Yeah, I left off Saturn, I know, but yeah. So then, going to back, because I did this totally out of order, Uranus. So we've moved beyond Saturn, and now we're into the territory of Uranus. And just a little quick historical side note is that up until 1780, the last planet that we could see, the last planet that we knew about was Saturn. So Saturn, the sun through Saturn, so Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, there are something called the classical planets, the 7 classical planets. And then there's this idea that once we move beyond Saturn, we're moving into an area that's invisible. You can't see Uranus with a telescope, although I did read someplace that under certain conditions at certain times of year and certain altitudes you can. I can't seem to verify that or not, but you definitely can't see Neptune. You can't see Pluto. You need like really high power telescopes in order to see these planets, but you can't see them with the naked eye, I guess is what my point is. So we're moving into territory with Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto that deals with something that is unseen. We're starting to interface with something that's beyond the normal. So kind of keep that in mind when you're learning about these planets and how to work with them. But Uranus is the planet of revolution. Its sole function, well, I shouldn't say sole function, but one of its primary functions is to break us out of the container of Saturn. Meaning, if our lives get too rigid, here comes Uranus to come shake it up. And there's something called the Uranus opposition that happens around age 42, and that's the classic midlife crisis. That's where we have that moment where we freak out because we've built a life, Saturn, that we suddenly realize is either inauthentic to who we are, or we have to have a moment where we're like, is this really what I want to do with the rest of my life? And so sometimes people make big changes at around age 42, and that's the Uranus opposition. So that's Uranus shaking us out of our old ways and trying to get us to align to something new. Moving on to Neptune. Neptune is very much a very spiritual planet. And I think that Neptune is actually one of the most misunderstood planets in astrology. Yes, Neptune is art and performance and film and glamour. And that's more on a mundane level because Neptune is certainly addiction. You see a Neptune, I call them Neptune problems, just taking that term sort of from Donna Cunningham, who talks about Pluto problems. But this idea that Neptune shows us where we have to give back in this lifetime. We've signed up to do something that's very selfless. So wherever Neptune is, there's a sense of having to balance out spirit. You can't do ego with Neptune. It's hard to even do ego with Uranus and Pluto because we're moving into the transpersonal when we're in the territory of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And then moving to Pluto, Pluto shows us about power and control. And we just, as I'm recording this, we had what's called a Pluto station, which means that Pluto came to a halt, at least from the perspective of Earth, and turned retrograde. This happens every year. So this is like its annual 5-month retrograde. So I say that because I've just been working a lot with the Pluto archetype lately, and I've been doing some channeled work, and the kind of the masters of the teaching that I'm working with, they talk about Pluto being a mirror and how Pluto's function is not good or bad. It's just to hold the mirror to our soul's journey through the lifetimes. And sometimes we don't always like what we see, and then we have to do the transmutation, we have to heal. But Pluto there's a lot of power in Pluto, but there's also a lot of shadow in Pluto. And I feel like when you start to deal with Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, you have to bring a lot of consciousness to these planets, because if you don't, you're going to get a lot of distortion from the level of the ego. So hopefully that's making sense, and please ask questions as we go along. So I'm going to check in, see if there's any questions. Looks like we're all good. just, I know that there's an actual question that's been answered by Jennifer. This is Katie. Can you talk about the difference between the North Node and rising signs and how they function differently in one's life? And this is, might be a little technical for some of you all. I don't know where you are in your astrology understanding, but so the rising sign is how you express yourself in this world. It's like the foot that you put forward. It has a lot to do with personality. So the rising sign is we're working on a mundane level with the rising signs. But when we talk about the North Node is about something bigger than the personality. It's bigger than the self. We're in the realm of fate. And I know that the word fate kind of makes people a little nervous. But the North Node talks about direction in life. What did you come here to do? What's your purpose? Why are you here? What's the meaning of life? These kind of big existential things. That's where the North Node comes in. So to maybe see how they relate to each other, sometimes the rising sign is making some what's called some challenging aspects to the nodes. And so maybe there's I don't want to say a struggle, but there's certainly a process that's been going on throughout the life where you're trying to resolve how you are like doing life versus maybe something that's bigger, maybe the sense of purpose that sometimes grates on the ego, because the ego doesn't want to give up control. The ego doesn't want to be in partnership with something beyond itself. It wants to, kind of hang on. So hopefully that answers your question, Jennifer. And if please ask more questions if that's not clear. So let's just move on to aspects. So let's just kind of recap for a second. We've got the wheel, we've got the signs, we've got the houses, and we've put the planets in the wheel. And this is where what's the relationship between the planets. So, astrology runs on the relationships that planets form with each other within the wheel. So a planet might be making a conjunction or a square, those are things that are called hard aspects, or they might be making a harmonious relationship to each other, would be a trine or a sextile. There is no good or bad in astrology, just consciousness. You need motivation in life. I once had somebody show me her chart. And she was very proud of the fact that it was pretty much all good aspects. And I was just like, uh-oh, like you need those hard aspects to motivate you. I think the people who have some of the toughest charts are those who have achieved the most because they've had their butts kicked. They've really had to push up the mountain. So if you're when you're starting to look, learn astrology and look at your chart, and maybe you kind of get a little daunted by all the red lines in your chart, like that's what's going to help you achieve great things. I mean, maybe not great things, but hopefully really good things. Or, you might be very ambitious, and people with a lot of, who are going to maybe have an impact on this world, they have the drive to get things done. Whereas the harmonious aspects, they're great. I'm not knocking them. Like, a trine is talent. A sextile is, how do I put that? The trine kind of has this very Jupiter feel to it. It's like, here, I do this. It's so easy. It's so effortless. And the trine is about support, or not support. A sextile creates support in the chart between two planets. Sextile, it's like Venus, so it has a little bit of a choir feel to it. But your hard aspects are your dynamic aspects. But the trines, they can get really lazy. So if you've got a lot of trines in your chart, you need some of that hard energy to make things happen with those trines. And if you don't have them natally, you will get them by something called transit. So it's not like, because your natal chart is not, it is a static entity, but it's not a static entity. It is growing and evolving, and as you are growing and evolving. So just quickly running through the glyphs that you'll see when you're learning astrology. The conjunction is a 0-degree aspect, and yes, I'll talk about orb in just a second. The sextile is a 60-degree aspect between two planets. A square is 90-degree aspect between two planets, and a trine is 120-degree aspect between two planets, and an opposition is a 180-degree aspect. These are what are called the major Ptolemaic aspects. There's 5 of them. Ptolemaic is after Ptolemy, who I believe was Greek, 2nd century AD, or is it BC? And he codified a lot of things that we know about astrology. And in his book, these are the only aspects you want to work with. Yes, there's other aspects. There's the quincunx, there's the biquintile, there's semi-sextile. These are what are called minor aspects. As you're learning astrology, they might be totally your jam, and you're like really into them, and that's great. So just start with let's say the basic ones, and then when you get really comfortable with them, then you can start working with these other minor aspects. Just going to check if there's any questions. Jennifer asks, are hard aspects always shown in red and harmonious always blue? That's actually a really good question, because you might see a natal chart that's all in black and white. And one of I guess, I don't know if it's, maybe astrologers got together and decided that they would present information this way, but I've noticed that I know that astro.com does that. It shows the trines and sextiles in blue, and it shows the conjunctions, squares, and oppositions in red. It shows the minor aspects in, I think, green, and then some of the really minor aspects, like the it's like the 135. I'm totally blanking on what it's called. Like you'll see like a black dotted line. But I think if you're totally new to aspects, because like I said, this stuff can get really really abstract and just fry your brain. And so just try to keep it simple. I think if you kind of just stick to the Ptolemaic aspects, and maybe as you train your brain to look at the chart and to process it, you're like, okay, red, hard aspect, blue is kind of a harmonious and supportive aspect that you'll get familiar with it, and maybe you won't need to see it so quickly. But when we look at some example charts, it'll be a little bit, or hopefully, clearer. And I did, one of the examples that I put in is from Time Passages, which presents the information similarly but different than, let's say, astro.com, or Astrodienst is the other name for astro.com. So this is where we're going to talk about orb really quickly, because I know that was one of the questions. So what does orb mean? Orb means it's the distance between two planets in an exact aspect. So here's an example. I talk about the conjunction in the second option. If two planets are conjunct and they're 5 degrees apart, the orb is 5 degrees. In astrology, people have very different opinions on the amount of orb you give a planet or two planets, for them to be within aspect of each other. It's generally considered kosher to have wider orbs for hard aspects. So you might have a planet that's got a 10-degree, it's not exact. So exact would be two planets that are exactly 180 degrees apart from each other. But let's say in another, there's a 10-degree separation. So it's not quite, it's 190 degrees. That you could argue is still with an orb. And this is when, you know, how do I put this? This is one of those things that when you're learning to read the charts like more and more and you're getting comfortable, you'll start to see if a planet is talking to each other or not. I don't know if that makes sense, but you know, and this is actually my own rule. You know, here's the thing, this is just me presenting what I think works, and my philosophy in life is you figure out what works for you. You might feel very strongly about tight orbs. Some people like loosey-goosey orbs. I think it depends, like for instance, an outer planet. So if you've got the sun in a wide square or a wide opposition to Pluto, it's still an aspect. For me, it's an aspect. I totally see it, even though maybe it's an 8 or 9 or 10 degree orb. But that I say that that's a judgment call for you all as you start to learn more astrology. Oh, and I think in this I write that there's use a lesser order for trines and sextiles. I just think that trines and sextiles, they don't they're not as dynamic generally. I mean, especially for sextiles, so you don't want to get super wide orbs for trines and sextiles, if that makes sense. All right, so this is the fun part when we start looking at example charts. And I'm looking at some of the questions right now. You know, Sandy asks, when you read natal charts, do you start with the aspects, or do you start with the basic sun, moon, rising and go from there? Or do you look at overall patterns or something else? That's actually a really good question. And here's the thing. Nobody ever taught me how to do astrology, so there might be a better way to do that. You know, different than, let's say, the example that I'm about to give you. This is just how it works for me. So I have, this is I guess, you know, how your astrology sausage gets made. When I sit down with a client chart, my ritual is I write it all. Like I have the data, but there's like, I will write out sun, moon, rising. I'll write out the degree. I'll write out what's the chart ruler, and that's something that we'll talk about in just a moment. What are the aspects the chart ruler is making? I'll look at where's the sun, you know, house, you know, what are the aspects of the sun making? Where's the moon? What are the aspects of the sun making? Then I look at the rulers of the sun and moon. This might be a little bit advanced for some of you all, but just kind of putting it out there. And you know, for me, yes, the sun is very important, but you enter the chart through the ascendant. And so you go, let's say if somebody has Sagittarius rising, you look to where's Jupiter in the chart, and that Jupiter is going to have a lot of power in this, you know, kind of fake example that I have. And it's going to tell you a lot about this person. It's going to be like the first stop on it's like on the energy train. Like I said earlier, if the natal chart is a schematic, what's the first stop, you know, with the energy? So it's going to go from the ascendant. So here's the thing about the ascendant or slash rising sign. That's the first breath of life. That's why the natal chart, like you need that exact time, because when you don't have the exact time, you don't have the exact ascendant degree, things can be totally off, and you don't have a real picture of the person on a soul level. If you don't have the birth time, and I know maybe some of you are like, wait, I don't have the birth time. Like maybe you're born in Australia where they weren't recording birth times, I think, until recently, or the UK, where you're really you're at the mercy of your parents, whether or not they took note of the birth time. But what was my point? Yeah, the actual, like, you know, having that birth time is very important. But if you don't have the birth time, you can do something called the solar chart. This is a little bit of a technical example. you put so if you're an Aries, you would put Aries on the first, and then all the subsequent signs after that. So Taurus, Gemini, Cancer, etc. You actually can get a lot of good information, and that's how your sun sign columns get written. So if you're an Aries, Saturn has gone into Sagittarius. That is Aries' ninth house. So this is a huge time about education, belief, travel for Aries. So I just want to kind of put that out there in case people are, they're starting to learn astrology and they don't have the birth time. And I know some astrologer friends who are born outside the United States where they don't have the time, and they're like, there are things you can do. It's something called rectification. It's a bit tedious. And if you're super into detective work, this might be your jam. But what you do is you take a very comprehensive list of what happened in your life. When did you get married? When did you go to school? Like major moves, deaths, major deaths in life. And you start to plug in that data, and you hopefully have a pretty good scope that you can start to get an idea of what the rising sign is. And it's like I said, it's very tedious, but it's actually very, very fascinating. So those are the options that are available to you. Just to kind of go back to the question about what do you look at? There are people that immediately notice patterns. They look at, there's different things called aspect patterns. I don't work with this as much, but I do want to put that out there for those that are learning astrology. There are things called bowls, like where the planets are kind of occupying just half of the chart and they're forming a little bit of a bowl. There's something called seesaws, where it looks like what the planets are kind of in this seesaw configuration. Those apparently mean things. I'm a really bad astrologer when it comes to that. I think a lot of what I do is so intuitive that sometimes maybe I'm not supposed to do what I do. I mean, at least that's not how you're supposed to do astrology, but nobody taught me how to do astrology. But here we are. I'm teaching you. So let's look at some examples, and definitely keep asking questions as you have them. If I can find my cursor. All right, so let me just quickly say that the examples that I've chosen, there's no political agenda. I've just chosen people that have been in the news or that are generally pretty well recognized names. Maybe if you're of a certain age, you don't know who Amy Winehouse is, but I will quickly explain. And I also picked people where there's good data. I know that they don't record birth times in the UK, but there's a whole thing in the astrology community about data collection. There's actually astrologers who that's pretty much their big function. What they bring to this community is that they go out and they find the data. There are places where you can request birth certificates so you can get birth times. I know one of the examples that's after this, that's how we got his birth information. Sometimes it's public record, and which is in the case of somebody else that I've listed here. But I think when Amy Winehouse, for those who don't know, she was a singer in the UK. She kind of had this very kind of raspy, soulful voice, but she was very, very, very talented, but she was also very famous for being a drug addict, and quite publicly so. And this idea of publicity, that's actually a good thing in her chart. We'll look at that in just a second. But Amy Winehouse, she was born September 14th, 1983 at 10:25 p.m. in London, England. And this chart here, this came from astro.com. So this was probably the way that the information is presented, the colors, that's probably something that if you're not familiar with already, you will be familiar with, because astro.com is, it's free. I use it. I mean, I have a design background, so I just think that it presents the information in a very clear and understandable way to read it. I have an astrology colleague, a good friend of mine, who does not like the charts from astro.com. She has a hard time reading them. So this is, I think, for you to figure out what your personal preference is. But I obviously think that this is pretty easy to read. I mean, from a kind of the way the information is presented. So let's just quickly run through the elements here of this natal chart so we can kind of be on the same page. So if you look to the left side of the chart, that's the rising sign. In this case, it's labeled AC. And it's got the little 17 underneath it with the 46. So the 17 means that that's 17 degrees. The 46 means 46 minutes. We see that this line on the left-hand side, so the line that goes right across the chart, that's the ascendant, descendant. It's lining up with the sign of Gemini. So Amy Winehouse, she was a singer, and Gemini is the sign of the voice. So maybe this touches a little bit on an earlier question about the ascendant or the rising sign. But the ascendant has a lot to do with how you present yourself to the world. It's kind of the clothes that your sun wears in a way. So Amy Winehouse, if we look down at the bottom of the chart, the bottom of the wheel, there's a circle, and that's the glyph, the sun. So she was a Virgo. So she, and if we kind of think, we're kind of pointing at elements. We got the sun, we know she's a Virgo, we know she's a Gemini rising, and then we locate the moon. Okay, her moon is over on the right-hand side of the chart, and it's at 0 degrees, 26 minutes of Capricorn. So hopefully these points are pretty clear, because I know that when people first see the chart, they can get a little overwhelmed with all this very cryptic looking information. A couple of things just to always keep in mind. We're working with a wheel. The wheel has 360 degrees. Each sign occupies 30 degrees of space. So within that logic, the ascendant is located at the 17th degree of Gemini. And then based on whatever mathematical formula the program is using to calculate or what's called the houses, you can see how the 12 houses, some of them are small, some of them are big. The default house program for astro.com is something called Placidus. Placidus is a really old house system. It uses a certain mathematical formula. If you're born in the higher altitudes on this planet, or not altitudes, the higher latitudes, or is it longitudes? Longitudes. So if let's say you're born in Scandinavia or the UK, and you're born maybe when the sun was getting lower in the horizon, it's, in the case of Amy Winehouse, she was born near the equinox. Sometimes the houses can get a bit exaggerated. There's another house system that I use, but it's not represented here. It's something called whole sign, and that would be, you've got, I'm trying to think if this is a good example with her chart. So in this chart right here, she has the signs of Taurus and Scorpio completely swallowed up in the 12th and 6th house. In whole sign, Scorpio would be her 6th house, but in this Placidus example, her 6th house actually begins in Libra, and you can see that if you look at the center of the circle, there's a 6. And you just follow that line, and you notice that it's lining up in Libra. The image that I'm showing you here is actually an excerpted from the image from astro.com, because in that image they've got something called an aspect grid. So you don't have to do the calculations in your head. You just look at the aspect grid and you would say, okay, she's got a conjunction of Sun and Mercury. She's got a square between the Sun, Mercury, and Neptune, and so forth and so forth. Just looking at some of the questions. So that's actually a good point. Yes. So this is probably somebody who, almost all her planets, except for the Sun and Neptune, are below the horizon. This is probably, and here's the thing. I don't know her. You don't know her. All we know about her is what was put out in the news. And, to be fair to her, like, we don't know what was going on in her life and maybe what made her make the choices that she did. So we're speculating here. I do want to be respectful to her. I know she's no longer on this planet, but she lived a bit of a tumultuous life. So I'm not trying to place blame or anything. So this is we're just looking at her chart for just to see an example of somebody's life and somebody who lived a life in the public eye. With the case of Amy Winehouse, there was a time when she was very famous, and she was very famous for the wrong reasons. She died before her Saturn return. She died at 27. She died at, I think it was the summer of 2011. I can't remember if that's quite correct, but she had this very powerful voice, she also did copious amounts of very destructive drugs, maybe heroin, maybe some crack, a lot of weed, a lot of alcohol, which brings me to the point of the things above the horizon. So in Amy's chart, the only thing that people see is the moon and Neptune. So here's the thing about Neptune. I said it's a very spiritual planet, but when you do the ego level things through Neptune, you get a lot of distortion. That's where you can get the illusions. That's where you can get addictions. And again, I'm just speculating here because she's got if you look down at the bottom of the chart, she's got, Sun Mercury conjunction. It's in the 5th house, the house of the performer. So if we, for reading this chart, just kind of quickly walk you through, you go to the ascendant, okay, Mercury, look for Mercury. Mercury's in the 5th house, conjunct the sun. The sun is about self-expression. It's talent. It's in the best possible way of ego, that sense of like, here, this is what I do, as opposed to the lower part of, ego. And then, it's in Virgo. So what she was very maybe technically adept at what she did. She had this kind of, she sang that song Rehab, for those who don't know, and I'm not going to sing it because that would just be embarrassing. But she sang the song about rehab and how she wouldn't go. And that's, that was like her big hit. That's how everybody got to know her. But behind that kind of bad girl image, she was very technically proficient. So there's a sense of craft to Virgo. The sun and Mercury, the sign of the voice, is in the house of self-expression and creativity. When you look at the charts of performers, your singers, your artists, the people that really kind of like are known for their creative talents, you generally see a packed 5th house, or a lot of Leo in the chart, or some sort of connection between the 5th house and the 10th house. And the 10th house is the house of status, career, reputation. I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but I wanted to put that out there in case people were curious. But that sun and moon, it's square Neptune. So is this somebody who, maybe the addiction side of Neptune really played into that, how she expressed herself? Maybe she was somebody with crippling insecurities and she didn't really know how to deal with it from a place of consciousness and something healthy. Again, I'm speculating, to be completely fair to her. But the only thing people saw was that sun and Neptune above the horizon. Another thing that's above the horizon is that little kind of key glyph on the left-hand side. That's Chiron. It's in the 12th. Things in the 12th, again, are things you don't see. So speculating here, she's probably somebody who had a lot of hidden pain, because things in the 12th are hidden. Chiron can be pain. Chiron can be, I see Chiron as a knot. and like kind of like scar tissue, and we have to undo that knot in that lifetime or this lifetime. Otherwise, it can kind of keep pulling at us, keep snagging us. Just see if there's any questions, because I know this stuff's a bit technical. So far, so good. So yeah, what are the other elements? This is a kind of a good example about the midheaven. See, it's at the top of the chart, is labeled MC, and how it's kind of askew. It's not straight up and down. So sometimes the midheaven will be at an angle, so to speak. In this case, she's got Aquarius at 11 degrees. That's her midheaven. Midheaven is a lot about how people see you. It's about career. You know, and she has Saturn, which is this is the ruler of Aquarius in Scorpio. So, you know, people did see her a lot for, let's say, maybe the more negative side of Scorpio, that kind of shadowy element of Scorpio. And I am a Scorpio, so I'm not picking out Scorpios, but and then this is actually bringing in the nodes, because I know there was a question asked earlier about the nodes, but you know, she has Sun and Mercury square the nodes. So planets that are square the nodes, there's a lot of pressure on those planets, karmically and spiritually. We kind of have to figure them out. There's a sense of needing to integrate those planets. So, you know, maybe this was a lifetime where she was really working on having to be seen, having to express her talents. And maybe the Neptune was too much. I don't know. I mean, that's just speculating. You know, maybe there was another way for her to do her Neptune. I don't know, but she's no longer with us. So see if there's any questions before we kind of move on to another chart. Oops. I just realized it's showing the same chart. We'll just go to Pope Francis. Here's an example of where we got his information. I say we in this kind of royal we, where there, allegedly in Argentina, you can request the birth information, like you pay $70 from the government. And after he became Pope, there was an Argentinian astrologer that got his records. It's 9 p.m., which if you are getting into astrology, that's a little like when times are rounded off, you want to I don't know, you just kind of want to be a little careful about rounded off times. Again, we can't always have the exact information, but if you can always double check, that's good. So what do we know about Pope Francis? Let's look at the basics. So he's got his sun is in Sagittarius. So if you look on the right side of the chart, the little circle glyph, and it's in the side of Sagittarius. It's at 25 degrees and 54 minutes. And his moon is in Aquarius. It's a little bit above the horizon. It's at 12 degrees Aquarius. And then he's got Cancer rising. So when you're looking at a chart, definitely sun, moon, rising, those are your big three. The sun is how you express who you are. So Sagittarius, what do we know about Sagittarius? How does Sagittarius like to express itself? Well, one of the ways Sagittarius can express itself is through faith. Sagittarius is the sign of religion. It's the sign of, it's spirituality, but it's earthly spirituality. Sagittarius is Jupiter ruled. When I say ruled, each sign has a planet that is its ruler. We're not going to go into that too much, just beyond kind of some of the examples. But the other planet or other sign that's ruled by Jupiter is Pisces. So there's a bit of a interesting yin and yang going on with Sagittarius and Pisces. Sagittarius would be earthly religion. Pisces is mysticism. That very subjective experience with the divine versus the very objective experience with the divine with Sagittarius. So, all right, this man's a Sagittarius. I'm not saying all Sagittarius become popes, but with like that first bit of information that we have, it's quite intriguing. This is a man who has, doesn't. I mean, again, there's no political agenda with the people that I chose. That from what we know about him, this is a man who has devoted his life to the church and to spirituality. What else do we know about Pope Francis's chart? Well, we see, okay, he's got the moon is in Aquarius. So what do we know about the moon? The moon is the planet of how we take in sustenance. It's how we nurture ourselves. It's that quiet side of us. It's our feelings. It's our emotions. It's our intuition. The moon reflects the light of the sun. It's how that ego, it's the yin to the sun's ego, the yang to the sun. So the sun and moon, like they're a duo in astrology, even though I think, it's in some astrologers' eyes, the moon sometimes can get downgraded. For me, and this is kind of at some of the core of the work that I do, I want to elevate the moon. I think that the moon is just as important as the sun, but they just serve very different functions. The sun gives off light, the moon reflects light. I keep saying life, but I think that that's actually appropriate in this case, because the sun is light and it is life, and the moon reflects life and it reflects light as well. So what we know from his moon that we also can see in his work, Aquarius is the humanitarian. Aquarius is very attuned to the needs of people, the group, the collective. And so this is somebody who needs to feel like he's doing something for humanity. The moon in Aquarius is a little bit of a cold placement for the moon, meaning that, the moon, I think in its home of Cancer, because Cancer is a sign that's ruled by the moon. The moon's a bit squishy in Cancer. It's very, it feels all the feels, and it's got that sense of like, you kind of are feeling something every different day. Sometimes Cancer's labeled as moody, but that's, because Cancer is so connected to the energy of the moon. And, we just had a new moon. So there's that sense of quietness with the new moon that slowly grows to full, and then it releases back to new. But when the moon is in Aquarius, it's not about the personal. It's not about the I. You're getting into something that's very abstract. And so that's why I say the moon is cold. I'm not picking on anybody who has a moon in Aquarius, but I think that the moon in Aquarius, you're thinking about things that are very abstract. There's a very humanitarian side to you. The moon is also what's called the chart ruler of this chart. And because what is the chart ruler? Well, the chart ruler is the ruler of the ascendant. So if he's got Cancer rising, that means the chart ruler is also the moon. So the moon is, in this case, has double duty. It's both, it is the moon, but it's also that first stop on the energy train. So I think I started to say this earlier and I didn't finish my thought, but about the birth time and why it's so important. So the birth time sets up that first breath of life. Where was the ascendant when you took that first breath? And so that's what brings life into the chart. And then we go from the ascendant to the ascendant ruler. In this case, it's the moon. So that moon's got a lot of importance in that chart. It's in the sign of Aquarius. So again, he's Pope. He's spent his life in the church. He's very famous for being fairly, attuned to the needs of the collective. There's a sense of piety. in the sense that he wants to take care of the poor. He's very different from his predecessor. He's a Jesuit. He doesn't wear the fancy robes. There's a sense of humbleness. So there's other those kind of parts to his chart. What else can we notice about his chart? Well, he's got planets all over the place. They're both above the horizon and below the horizon. And in this case, the sun, it's just past setting. How do we know that? So when the sun is below the horizon, it means it's nighttime, versus when somebody's born during the daytime and the sun would be above the horizon. But in his case, it's over there on the right side. So we know that the sun has just gone down, maybe within the last half an hour or so. He's born in the southern hemisphere, so the days are long in Argentina in December. And that part of the chart, the sixth house, is very service oriented. Those are people that, this is the thing about astrology. It's not just the sun, even though we just got a lot of information via the sun, like, oh, wow, he's actually totally living Sagittarius. He's the Pope. He was a priest before that. But this is where, when you start to bring in the other notes of the natal chart, you start to paint a bit of a more complex picture. So his sun is in the sixth house. We know the sixth house is a sign about service. There's a sense of ritual to the sixth house. It's about day-to-day life. It's about the common man. In the sixth house, people who have a lot of sixth house energy, they're not they're not doing it for themselves. They're trying to give back in some way. These are your volunteers, the people with a lot of sixth house energy. That can also manifest with people who are working some sort of healing profession. There's the sixth house is also about diet and nutrition. I don't know, maybe he's really into eating well, but something we don't know. He was also born with his sun conjunct the north node. That's what that little squiggly symbol is below the sun. The north node is about dharma. It's what you came here to do. It's what your spiritual north point is. And so you could say, wow, his dharma is Sagittarius. His dharma is the church in some way. Maybe he's had a lot of lifetimes where he's been in spiritual service. So there's that. So it's just kind of funny that he kind of became this embodiment of what his natal chart is saying. I mean, this is somebody who also has Chiron in the 12th. I mean, again, we don't know the man, don't want to speculate too much, but maybe there's a lot of hidden pain that maybe led him to his faith. I don't know. This is somebody who has both Saturn and Neptune square the chart. You can see, so Saturn is up there in Pisces at 16 degrees, and it's making a square to the nodes, and then that Saturn is opposing Neptune in Virgo. So he is, I think there's some, I would have to guess based on his chart that maybe there really is some realness behind some of these acts that he's been doing. I think in the time he's been Pope, has been very attuned to the needs of the poor and trying to be a good servant, a good spiritual servant. But that's just me speculating. Again, no political agenda. But this is somebody who, he's well known, and we have his birth information. So just I can't see his chart. Oh, somebody said they couldn't see his chart. So yeah, I'll read his birth information. It's December 17th, 1936, 9 p.m. in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Yeah, if there's any questions about his chart so far, please let me know in the chat, or there is a Q&A section. other things. And this is where it's like, was he born at exactly 9 p.m.? Is there some wiggle room? I guess that's another lesson for another day. But other things that we notice about his chart, and this is something called the planets that are highest in the chart have a lot of status. So in this case, when I say highest, planets that are closest to the midheaven, and the midheaven is that MC at the top of the chart that's kind of to the left. He's got Uranus, the planet of revolution, closest to his midheaven. So, he is, depending on your background and your beliefs, he's either a revolutionary or he's not revolutionary enough. But, I think in the eyes of many other people, let's say within the Catholic Church, he's certainly a revolutionary. He's certainly doing Uranus on a public level. Uranus is one of these kind of reforming, transforming planets. And again, planets that are near the midheaven, it's what we're known for. There are planets that help us in our career. I mean, it's not super radical to be Pope, but I think that kind of feeds into, because I know that he's got the moon in Aquarius making a square to Uranus. So maybe this is somebody who's always been very fueled by kind of the needs of other people in the collective. Maybe there's a sense of selflessness. I'm speculating here. There's something called like when you're looking at the 4 angles, you want to pay attention to what are the planets ruling the 4 angles, because they'll tell you more about career. He's got Venus. Venus is the ruler of his Taurus midheaven. It's over in Aquarius. Again, that's kind of painting the same picture that we've been painting. Because one of the things that you'll see in a natal chart is you'll start to see the same theme repeated. And it seems like there's a lot of stuff going on with Uranus and Aquarius. Again, these are 2 influences in the chart that talk a lot about the needs of the collective and kind of pushing boundaries. The IC is going to tell you a lot about your home environment. Where do you want to, what connects you to this world? Think of the IC as a root. It's what connects you to this incarnation. So, how are you feeding yourself in this incarnation? So sometimes if you look at the sign on the IC, it tells you how you, in a way, like the moon, take care of yourself. He's got Scorpio there, so I don't really know enough about his biography to know about his home environment growing up. But the ruler of Scorpio is Mars. I use traditional rulers, by the way. Mars is in the 3rd house. So maybe he's somebody who has always been quite, studious, reads a lot at home. Again, I'm speculating. It's one of the things about natal charts with public people or famous people is that you're getting a lot of private information. And it's, how do you resolve that with the public persona? Because in the sense of Amy Winehouse, that we kind of only saw certain things about her, but as we saw in her chart, there's a lot of things below the horizon. It's like, who was the woman versus this kind of, now I guess, mythical person out in the public. Okay, somebody was saying can't see the natal chart. Yeah, so let me know if you guys have any questions. You can kind of keep pulling back the layers. He's got Sun opposite Chiron. Maybe he's somebody who is quite sensitive. I feel like Chiron gives you a lot of compassion and empathy, especially for those who have either been abandoned or have some sense of injustice. This is a man who's got Pluto in the 1st house. So Pluto, or any planet in the first house, people see, like that's what they kind of see when they first meet you. So maybe there's an intensity to him when people first meet him. He's, Pluto is very much part of his personality. See any other notable things to mention? That's it. I wanted to show you what an event chart looked like. And I also wanted to show you what another program looks like, how they display the data. This is an example for the Aries new moon on April 18th, 2015. That was at 2:57 p.m. Eastern in New York. And this is set for New York, New York. Obviously, everybody experienced the new moon. You could create your own event chart. You could be in Sydney. You could be in Iowa. The planets will be the same, but let's say you'll have a different rising sign depending on where you are on the planet. So maybe this is a little bit about how I work when I'm looking at the new or full moon. And for those of you who follow me on Astrology, or my Facebook page, or my Twitter, or my website, I do write about the new and full moon. So we have a new moon, and then 2 weeks later, like clockwork, we have the full moon, and that cycle repeats every 2 weeks, every 2 weeks. And then for me, the new moon creates the energetic container for the next 28 days. There's this thing in astrology, it's like always like these cycles within cycles. So we're in a bigger cycle, which is, let's say we just had the solar eclipse last month. So this is talking about a 6-month cycle that's about endings, because that solar eclipse on the 20th of March 2015 was at 29 degrees of Gemini. The 29 degrees of Gemini is the last degree of the zodiac. You can't get more loaded than that. If 0 Aries is the first breath of life, this is that moment right before life, but it's not incarnated. There's a sense of looking backwards at 29 Pisces. So we're in a time in this 6 months eclipse cycle where it's about tying up loose ends. But then here we are with this new moon in Aries, and we know it's a new moon because if we look up at the chart, the glyph for the sun, which is the circle with the dot in the middle, and the moon, they're both at 28 degrees Aries, 25 minutes. A new moon just means the sun and moon are conjunct. A full moon means the moon is making opposition to the sun. So in this case, it's happening in Aries. We know that it's in Aries because it's labeled with the little Aries glyph. And since we want to know more about this event, in this case, it's the new moon, we look to the ruler. The ruler of the sun and moon in this case is Mars. What are the aspects? Now, this chart displays aspects differently, and I actually don't like this about time passages. Sorry, time passages. But the stuff, I think you can fix this in the preferences, but in this case, the data is all in the circle. So for me, it's just a little bit hard to read. Maybe you love it. So I'm looking at right now an event chart for the Aries new moon. So I've moved beyond Amy Winehouse, because I know that somebody that's attending live can't see the chart for whatever reason. But right now we're looking at the chart for the Aries new moon, just so you could see like what is it, when it's not a natal chart, when it's actually an event chart. Why would you want an event chart? So in the case of the new moon talks about what's going on the next 28 days. This new moon is about new beginnings, or new moons are in general about new beginnings, but this one's in the sign of Aries. Aries is about the fresh start. It's about spring. It's about renewal. I should say, for those who are listening who are in the Southern Hemisphere, I know that like the astrology is very northern hemisphere biased. I know that you're in the southern hemisphere, and it's not spring right now, it's actually autumn. But the natal chart is, our astrology rather, is metaphoric. So even though it's not, Aries doesn't correspond with spring on your side of the world, it still has that energy of spring because it's metaphoric. And what is spring? It's new life coming forth. It's that first breath of life. It's green shoots. Here in New York City, it's finally spring. There's cherry blossoms, there's tulips. So there is that sense of life, is renewing after winter. So in this event chart, it's just telling us about the next 28 days. We look at Mars, the ruler of the new moon. Mars is making something called a trine to Pluto. There's a lot of power in Pluto. Yes, it's a trine, so there's a sense of like there's an opportunity, there's an energy. It's making something called, or this Mars is making something called a square to Jupiter. So maybe this is where we have to take a leap of faith. Or maybe we're being a little cocky and we're taking a risk because, squares to Jupiter, like, it's, Jupiter generally has a rosy reputation in astrology, although there is a dark side to Jupiter, which I think is like there's too much of a good thing, or that kind of fundamentalist attitude with Jupiter, because sometimes it's like, I'm always right. So if you're a Sagittarius, sometimes, and I have Sag rising, I have 3 planets in Sag, so sometimes it's just like, okay, I always think that I'm right, but maybe I'm not always right. So maybe sometimes something with this this next 28 days is about working through where we think we're right versus where we're actually not right. But I think that this, some of the elements that we're pointing out in this chart talks about it's a time of new beginning. Why else would you want an event chart? Let's say you want to start a business and you want to pick the best day to start a business. And businesses can have birth charts too. It's not just people. Let's say you want to get married, or there's a major event that you want to pick the best date. So you would pick, if you're getting married, you would pick a date. Or hopefully you would do so very skillfully, because there are a lot of rules about picking a wedding date. Don't get married during Venus retrograde or Mars retrograde or Mercury retrograde. Anyway, that's just a little aside. But that's why you would want an event chart. So that chart then becomes a record for the marriage. So the chart, just like the chart for a birth chart, it can get transits, it can get progressions, it can get eclipses. So it becomes this kind of this thing that tells you about how the relationship is unfolding in real time. It can talk about strengths, it can talk about weaknesses. So there's are really valid ways we would want to use an event chart. So I wanted to throw this one in for funsies, because the 2 or 3 rather chart examples that I've shown you so far, they're modern representations. Astrology is a very ancient discipline, but in the absence of computers, maybe the information was presented a little differently. This is something that I saw on the web. It is a birth chart for Henry Miller. It looks like it was drawn up, I think, sometime in maybe the 30s. I think that's when I found it. That's what the information at the time said. But Henry Miller was born December 26, 1891, and it looks like from this document that we have that he went to an astrologer, a German astrologer, probably in the early part of the 20th century. So to me, the astrologer, there's some familiarities about this chart, but also some not familiarities. And the stuff around the edges of this chart, that's a lot. It's something called there's one thing called the lunar mansions. don't worry, we will not learn about that. I'm not saying it's not important, but it's Indian astrology. But I just wanted to show you like how detailed you can get with this. There's something called it's either decans or decans. I'm always saying it wrong. But it's DECANs. So you can like have all these like sub rulers and stuff. But anyway, I just thought that was kind of a pretty funky artifact. And it looks like, this is, back in the day, somebody did this by hand. And then the person, it looks like, had these stamps for the planet glyphs and then kind of stamped them in and then wrote on the piece of paper what the degrees were. So this is, this is what astrology looked like back in the day. And then if you really want to get old school, this is a natal chart for Charles I, who was King of England. This was created by a man called William Lilly, and he was a very famous English astrologer back in the 1600s. He wrote a book called Christian Astrology, but he was very, if you're getting into astrology, and this is very different from what I do, but it's certainly valid if it's something that you feel drawn to. There's been a renaissance in the last, 15 years maybe, where a lot of the old astrology is being resurrected. It's being retranslated from sometimes ancient or from Sanskrit, so sometimes from ancient Greek, and getting back to a lot of the source material. But if in the Indian system, they don't do circle charts. They have these square charts, and it's a little trippy. And I guess the history nerd in me just thought it was interesting because it's an artifact from time. So yeah, we're kind of pretty much coming up to the end. And if you have any questions before we wrap up, this is definitely the time to do so. And, kind of some last minute pointers. Maybe we'll go back to Pope Francis here. I wish I'd had the other, I put in the data for these other people, like I had Queen Elizabeth, but it looks like I did not actually put in the correct chart. So that's kind of embarrassing. But, good examples, Henry. My two examples are Amy Winehouse and Pope Francis. You couldn't get, two disparate people, I guess if you wanted to people who have lived very different lives. One, in service to something bigger. Maybe you could argue that Amy Winehouse was in service to something bigger in her own way. Had she lived, I don't know. But, quick pointers. When you're sitting down with a chart, just to kind of recap everything that we've talked about, start with your basics. Where's the sun? Where's the moon? What's the rising sign? The sun, again, is the self. It's how you express who you are. It's the light of the chart. The moon is how you kind of, your wants, your needs, your desires. It's how you, it's how you bring soul to your chart. The sun is just the ego, but you need that moon to bring richness and substance to your life. Where's the rising sign? The rising sign's always going to be on the left-hand side of the chart, but what sign is it in? What's the ruler of that ascendant? What is the ruler doing? Which house is it in? Is it in a really hard aspect to an outer planet like Pluto or Uranus? Or is it making a conjunction to Jupiter, which makes it have a lot of faith? And Jupiter, lives life very in a big way. Jupiter is very generous. But if, let's say, that planet is making a square to Pluto, maybe there's a sharpness to the person. Maybe there's an intensity, like kind of a no bullshit attitude. Or maybe they're kind of doing Pluto in that higher conscious way, and they're a therapist, because Pluto is also really great for people who want to get to the bottom of mysteries, who want to help people heal. So look at the, what's the chart ruler doing? What's the moon doing? What house is it in? What aspects are it making? Does the moon feel like it's getting its needs met? Because sometimes people are they're unhappy because they're not getting their needs met in a very fundamental way, and that's just translating to everything else. If you want to, like, you can look at the aspect patterns. Is there a lot of red lines? Is there a grand water trine? People who have a grand water trine, and that just means 3 planets in the 3 water signs, there's a lot of emotion and soul and intuitive feeling, but also know that your trines can get a bit lazy. They need that hard energy to make something happen with those trines. Trines are talents. So that's something to keep in mind. People who have very strong natal, outer planets in their charts. When I say strong outer planets, I mean, Neptune's doing a lot, or Uranus is doing a lot, or Pluto's doing a lot in the chart. And I found that sometimes with the outer planets, it's not kind of just your life. You're plugged into something bigger. And I think part of the journey in this lifetime is to kind of come into alignment with that sense of purpose and dharma, and knowing that you're here to have an impact in some way. Pluto and Uranus want to reform in their own way. If Uranus is a revolutionary and Pluto just wants to tear it down. Neptune is very compassionate. It wants everybody. It feels everything, and it wants to, help everybody. And sometimes people with a strong Neptune have their heart broken because they feel too much, and so they have to learn to be very discerning in who they're open to, because sometimes people with a strong Neptune can be too open, which is, I think, sometimes the problem with people who have substance abuse problems. If they have a strong Neptune, they're like kind of too open to everything. And I think you just kind of get opened up to the astral and etheric realms too much. And you have to make sure you're grounded in this incarnation. You have to make sure your feet are on the ground in this world. Other things to keep in mind: where are the planets? Are they bunched up in one area of the chart? Are they all over the place? It's one of the things I often get asked is, I don't have any planets in my 7th house. Does that mean that I'm not going to have a relationship? No, of course not. Of course there's potential of relationship. Just because you don't have a planet there doesn't mean it's not important. And this is where rulers come in. So you would look at the ruler of the 7th house. What is the ruler of the 7th house doing? What aspects is it making? Is there challenging aspects? Or are you trying to work through a lot of stuff through relationships in this lifetime? Or are relationships generally something that comes easy to you? So that's something to look at. Questions I get asked a lot is about career. What am I well suited for? And that's where you would look at the sign on the midheaven. If you've got Gemini on the midheaven, maybe you're a natural writer. Maybe there's a sense of teaching to Gemini as well. Maybe there's a sense of speaking and movement and travel with Gemini. Gemini also is, Gemini loves multiples. It's the sign of the twins. So maybe if you have Gemini as your career sign, you have more than one career, maybe even at the same time. So looking to see what's the sign on the midheaven, where's the ruler of that sign, what is the ruler doing? Is it making challenging aspects? Is it making dynamic aspects? Sometimes the chart will pick, and this is not always, but can paint a very different picture about career than, let's say, what people are living. You'll see how people are maybe living one part of their chart, but not living all of their chart. And that could be for very, very different reasons, maybe because of consciousness, maybe because of fears over disappointing family or disappointing loved ones. There could be a lot of cultural restriction about, and this is a thing about astrology and about natal charts in particular. It doesn't show consciousness. So you could have another person with Cancer rising and Taurus in the midheaven, and maybe planets in the same way, and they're not the Pope, or they're living the archetype of those signs in different ways. And the thing that the chart doesn't talk about is it doesn't talk about our cultural backgrounds. It doesn't talk about because this is the thing about the astrology that I do, is that the idea is that you're always working on your chart. You're always trying to elevate the chart to its highest potential. If you've got challenging aspects in the chart, how do you work with that to open up the potentiality? An example of this is this era that we've been in the past few years, this time of Uranus square Pluto. Everybody has been experiencing that, and not everybody has had these very catastrophic experiences. Some people have really thrived during the Uranus-Pluto square. Maybe this was the push that they needed to live the life that they've always wanted to live. So those are the things you want to keep in mind. I know sometimes people warn against pathologizing the natal chart when they're starting to read natal charts, because not everybody is going to live out a Sun-Pluto opposition in the same way. That's where sometimes when you read the textbooks and they give you examples, or they kind of give you these little cookie cutter definitions of what these different aspects mean, and you may read that and you'd be like, wow, that's not what's happening. They haven't given you the expanded potential of what, let's say, Sun-Pluto opposition, and maybe you're wondering, what does that mean, Sun-Pluto opposition? So, I think that people who have Pluto in aspect to their Sun, they live life in a very kind of intense way. I think Pluto is really getting them to develop a strong sense of self, but they can't do that unless they look at all the maybe sometimes lower shadow aspects of the ego. So the times where they want to be in power and control, maybe they're being unconsciously manipulative. But, and this is where the expanded consciousness comes in, somebody who is doing some Pluto in let's say the expanded consciousness way, they might use that energy to be a therapist or a healer. And so they're using Pluto as, looking into the hidden realms, but in a way that helps people transform. Or maybe their very being helps people transform. They don't really have to do it so much. It's kind of effortless. So that's to give you an example of how those can manifest in different ways. Trying to think if there's any other questions from those listening, but again, astrology is a language, and this is about learning, getting the glyphs down, so knowing what the different symbols mean, whether it's the signs or the planets. It's about knowing what the aspects mean, and then it's trying to get a sense of what happens when you put these planets in different parts of the charts. I mean, one of the ways that I learned, apart from just repetition, is I had the natal charts, the people in my life, and I just quietly observed. If I had a colleague who maybe they quit their job, and I'm like, hey, what's going on in their chart when they quit? Maybe they quit around the time of full moon, which is this kind of dynamic time, and we make decisions around the full moon, and that full moon fell into their chart highlighting career. Maybe they got a promotion, maybe they got a better job. So this is a time when career was really highlighted for them in a better way. So I think astrology is a lot of observation, trying not to make too many hard and fast judgments. about the chart, getting to know the people behind the chart, seeing how they live the chart. And then if this is your own chart and you're noticing certain things in the chart that maybe make you like, oh, like, I don't know, I've got all this Neptune, like, how do you elevate the expression of these of the planets in your chart? So unless there's any other questions, I think we're gonna wrap up with a few, kind of 7 minutes before the top of the hour. But it's been my pleasure. I know we had like a few minutes where I couldn't quite turn on the start the webinar, but thank you guys for sticking it out. And it's, again, been my pleasure to talk to you about astrology. And, the kind of the cool thing is you'll get the video and you can watch it at your leisure, watch it again. And if you have questions, definitely email me. My email address is empoweringastrology@gmail.com. So again, have a wonderful evening or whatever time of day it is when you're watching this. And, I hope you guys are inspired to learn more about astrology. And I think pretty much the next step is to learn about rulerships and maybe even make this a little bit more interactive where you all are submitting your natal charts as you feel comfortable to do so, and we can kind of do some real-time chart readings. So again, thank you very much and have a good night. Bye.